Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel. It's been a while since I hosted. I had a really big weekend because it was a new moon, and one of the local high schools brought 28 kids up and wanted to see if I still knew how to star hop with my 15-inch dog. And I didn't, so it was rather taxing. But I finally did get some sleep this afternoon, and I'm up here and ready to host Eric. Eric Coles is going to be telling us about animating the sun, and we're really glad to hear that. We also have noted that we've got we seem to have better resolution in the room with our TV cameras here, or with our cameras. So we don't know how that will apply to everything. We hope we look better than we used to. I mean, Lord knows there was a lot of room for improvement. And so anyway, let me get started with the show here. And yoo-hoo. There. Now, if I'm right, you should be seeing all three of me. And I wanted to do that so that I could share. Oops, I stopped sharing that. I'm sharing the wrong tab. It's not letting me come up. There it is. If I'm right, you should be seeing. Okay. You can see that tonight we've got Eric. Next week we've got Luke. Luke is going to be back in just a few seconds to tell us about what he's doing next week. And Rumen is coming up a couple of weeks from now. Then we've got an open date. I don't know if we've talked yet about how we're going to fill that open date, but we all should have a program ready to go. And we're pretty good at getting some really good information to you all. I've read some reviews of the Astro Imaging channel lately, and the one thing they seem to emphasize with us is not how young and cute we are, like with some of the other YouTube channels, but how much information we've got about Astro Imaging here. So it's pretty interesting. Scott Roberts will be coming up the week after that. He's I've known him since like forever and ever, and 25 years or something like that. I ran into him out at NEAF, and I asked him if he'd come on over and do a show. So he'll be here. He hasn't told us what he's going to be talking about yet, but he'll be here. And the week after that, another Luca is coming in to tell us about how to improve our processing. But you can see that we've got several open sessions along the line here, and we need your help. The hardest part of putting on the Astro Imaging channel is getting people to present every week. I mean, every week almost we have to have a show. And if that's, it's just hard to get everybody all the time. So we need you to volunteer. You may think that you need to know a whole lot about Astro Imaging, and you may need to be the best there is at this or the best there is at that. But the fact is, all you need to do is be able to really express to other people some things that you have learned, some things that they might need to know. Even if you're not the most experienced, you may have a lot to share about just getting started in Astro Imaging, or just getting started on that new shed you built to house your equipment, or things like that. On the other hand, we've got Luca. Luca Quaglia is here today, and he's going to tell us about measuring the eclipse solar radius next week. And Luca, why don't you chip in here and tell us a little bit about what you're going to be doing next week.
Good evening, everyone. I'm very excited to present to the Astro Imaging channel next week. And the topic will be the eclipse flash spectrum, which is a fascinating aspect of total solar eclipses, and probably like an aspect maybe a little bit less well known than other aspects of total solar eclipses. And mainly how we can use it to estimate the radius of the sun, and then from there, how can use the knowledge that we can glean from the flash spectrum to improve eclipse maps and eclipse predictions. So I'm very passionate about the topic, and I hope you will find it interesting next week.
Thank you,
Thank
Luca.
you. Thank you.
But tonight we've got Eric. He's one of our own, and not too long ago he put some solar observing equipment out at a remote observatory, and he's going to tell you a lot about this kind of stuff and some other things he's done with remote with solar imaging. So, Eric, why don't you just take it over?
Thanks, Alex. Well, welcome everyone. I have been imaging the sun in narrowband for, I guess, about 11 years. And over that time, I guess my knowledge, the telescopes, as everything has really evolved. And just like everything else, you tend to get better and better at what you're doing. But over the last, I would say, last 6 or 8 months, there have been a number of innovations, at least for my processing, which has really made a complete difference in the results that we get from our solar animations. Now, I think most people that do solar imaging, whether it's white light or narrowband, are really doing one shot. That is, they're capturing videos, they're processing, and they're coming up with a single image. And that's something I did for a number of years. But in watching what's going on with the sun, it was obvious things were moving all the time just from what I was capturing. So myself and a friend of mine, Detlef Schmidt, who we couldn't get into the room tonight, but I think is watching. Detlef, hi, on YouTube. We kind of both decided that we really want to do animations. And how do you do animations? Well, you capture a bunch of images and you somehow put them together in some kind of an animated file. Well, that turned out not to be as easy as you thought, because we ended up with some very high-powered scopes, and trying to get them to stay on one spot and then to align everything just turned out to be hours and hours worth of effort. But again, recently I found ways to shorten that down so that from the time I capture a bunch of videos to the time I get a finished image can all be done in less than an hour. And that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. But before I do that, let me just share a screen here. I'm going to share a screen, entire screen, and we'll share this screen. And I'm going to hopefully bring up a PowerPoint presentation. Good. So the title is Solar Animations, Resources and Processing. And what you're seeing right now is just a single frame of an animation, which we're going to more or less reproduce on the show tonight to show you how quickly it can be done. So what am I going to cover? Hardware and software, the setup at the SRO. A couple months ago, we were introduced to a gentleman, Jason Provodekis, who was going to build his own observatory at the SRO, a private observatory. And he was going to put in 2 piers. And through an introduction to Keith, the owner of the SRO, and a discussion we had with Jason, we came to the agreement to put in my solar setup at one of those piers. So instead of trying to image from my back deck and worrying about the weather, we are now imaging at the Sierra Remote Observatories with their clear blue skies. Although they haven't been that clear the last month, they will be clear probably 200, not nights, but 200 mornings a year. So we should be able to get the best solar images that our setup can produce. So that's the SRO setup. Online resources. When we choose targets, when we see what's going on with the sun, there are certain places that we go, and I will briefly cover that. I'll show some examples of the capture and some of the pre-processing. Now, the pre-processing, I think, is fairly common. I'm not going to spend much time with it, but it's important to see how we get to the final animation that we post. And really, the heart of the presentation is the animation processing examples. And the last thing is what's going to happen in the future. Okay, so what is the first thing that everyone wants to see? They want to see the hardware, right? We like to see the hardware. So let's bring up this and show you our hardware. And there it is. Does everyone see our camera out at the SRO? Someone in the room? Can you see
We need
this?
someone in there. Yes, we can see it inside.
We can see it.
Is that a
So-
live picture, Eric?
That is a live picture of the observatory, Jason's observatory at the SRO, where you can see the solar scope on the left, the folded refractor designed and built by Detlef Schmidt, who is in the room somewhere. Raise your hand, Detlef. Thank you very much again. And on the right is Jason's setup, which is a 550L mount and a 20-inch CDK. And on the right is a big Maxitop that came from Detlef as well. So that's a live camera. And I control everything from here. So I am going to open the roof. Even though it's not sun time. Isn't that cool?
It's still bright and sunny out here in Southern California.
Yes, it's a little bit cloudy. So this is what we normally do in the morning. Of course, the sun is, not within reach of the telescope right now, but if it was, we would point it there. Now, an interesting thing about this camera setup, it's the least expensive thing in the observatory. I think it was $30, but it's one of the most useful tools that we have because, as you will see in a moment, as soon as I get this up, I'm going to bring it up on my phone and we can control where the camera points, which turns out to be very useful. So I'm going to point it up. Oh, that doesn't look good. So basically, when we're looking around to see what's going on, or when someone's working on the telescope, we can see and hear what's going on by moving this Weiss camera around. It's also very useful when we point towards the sun because the sun, this is an open folded refractor. And we can make sure that the sun is going down the barrel of the telecentric, that little pipe you see. You can't see that little pipe you see in the center. So I'm going to unpark the solar refractor. And now you see it's moving. Now, I can't point it towards the sun, so I think the sun is getting pretty much towards the horizon, but I'm going to point it towards some Polaris. Just give me a little time to find Polaris. I'm scrolling down. Come on, Polaris. E, F, G, H, I. Here we go. And this is what we do in the morning, except what we're doing is pointing towards the sun, but I'm just going to point towards Polaris. And I'm doing this so you get a better look of what the solar refractor, how it's put together. So this is a folded refractor. Of course, let me move the camera up so you can see this better. There you go. So this is an open system. At the front of the folded refractor is a filter which eliminates most of the heat light. And behind that is just a doublet lens where the light comes in, and there's a mirror at the bottom, right at the bottom of the screen, which bounces up to another flat on the top of the screen, which goes down that tube and then goes into a camera we have at the bottom. And that's a solar refractor. And there's our 174 camera. So the focal length of this telescope is 5 meters, which means we're looking at a very, very small part of this sun. So it's important that we have a good model so that we get exactly to the right place. Even though the sun's a big target, sometimes we can be a little bit off, and being able to see where the sun is shining on the refractor is very valuable. So now I'm going to park it. Let's see. We're done looking at it. So now we're going to park the telescope. And when the telescope is parked, we're going to close the roof. Does anyone have a question about the folded refractor telescope? Oh, what I failed to mention is that there's a hydrogen alpha filter right behind that long, narrow tube called the telecentric, and that's a 0.3 angstrom solar filter. Very, very narrow. And
I'm,
now,
I'm sorry. Oh, Eric, I was muted. I had muted myself, so because I was having some coughing. And there had not been any questions, but John at Astro once has then asked a question, or made the comment that it takes him a long time to find the sun in the telescope. So you actually use a very good pointing model to get you to the part of the sun that you actually want, right?
well, I'm going to cover that a little bit, but
Okay.
basically, I think that'll become obvious
Okay.
once we get there. So
Okay.
I'm going to just briefly move over another tab. So this is what our PC looks like at the SRO. And when we open up, we go to the sun, we start our camera, we start up our filters, start up our camera, and we use fire capture for all the captures. It's allocating buffer. Of course, we don't see anything because the roof is closed and the sun is setting. And from there, we do captures, accumulate the videos, and processing happens after that. So I think we're done with that. Wise camera. So let me show you a couple of videos of what actually goes on when we're doing a capture. I got 3 videos. We'll just run one at a time. So here's the setup. So we have the camera going. We open up the telescope. This is going to take a little bit longer. Open up the roof. It's going to take a little bit longer, so I'll move that along. Roof is open. You saw we unparked the telescope. And this video was taken about 8:30 in the morning. So you see the sun is just coming up on the east. We select the sun. This is a 10 micron mount, and they consider the sun a planet. I'm not sure how that works, but I guess it's got to be somewhere. And now we're slewing to the sun. Now you probably can't see it, but if you look at that long pipe, which is telecentric, you can see a little orange rim around it, which means the sun is pretty close to going down that tube into the camera. Now it may not be perfectly aligned, but we're going to fix that in a little bit. So then I start the camera. It's allocating memory. And here's our image. We don't really see the sun yet because it really hasn't It hasn't been perfectly aligned, but we're going to fix that. So we have little controllers on the 10 micron mount, and we're going to move it around, and we're going to find the sun because it's really close. Remember, we have a very small field of view, so it's easy to miss. Come on, where's the sun? Oh, it's coming up. Oh, there's the sun. So we've turned up the gain. So now I'm going to turn down the gain so I can look around the sun. And that's what we do every morning. We go to another resource, which I'll show you in a minute, and we look around to see what's going on. Is there a sunspot? Is there a possibility of a prom? Now it's very early in the morning. The sun's barely over the horizon. So things are a little jiggly. So what we're doing now is just looking around, trying to find something to image. And you can see how small a field of view we have because it takes a while to get across. Oh, there's a nice prom. Oh, there's another nice prom. We might do that. So this is kind of our look around in the morning to see what we're interested in doing. We haven't done the fine focus. We're not in the best imaging time or gain. I'm just changing the gain to see how big that prom is. And then, oh, here's another spot. We might go with that one. So this is our look around in the morning. Overshot it a little bit. Over the other way. It's real easy to do. So that's our startup, our look around. And again, if you look at the telescope itself, you can see, oh, it just jumped to the next video. So now we're actually imaging two sunspots. And this is a typical capture. And this is done with fire capture. And you can see we have a nice histogram. It's very broad. And we have our bullseye. Let me just stop that for a second. So even though we have a nice model, since this is a 5-meter scope, it's easy for things to drift a little bit. And we don't want that. We're doing a capture. See in the upper right where it says fire capture auto run. And we're capturing frames about every 60 seconds, 2,000 frame videos. And then the end result is if we capture enough of these frames and we process them, we will have basically a movie of what's going on. And we use the bullseye to have a target where if we drift a little bit, we can use the controls on the 10 micron mount to kind of move things in the target. So we can, even with a good model and decent polar alignment, which I think we could improve, we're still going to have to make small adjustments to keep this target in the field of view. So I'll let this play out. And in a minute, I think we're going to do a capture.
And that is not auto guiding. That is you pushing buttons.
We have a model that we go with. Let's see. Nope. I think we're done with this. And I think we're done with this. Resources. So how do we know what to look for? Well, there's a couple things that we look at. There's our, this is the one I've been looking at lately. There's a lot going on the sun. We have our sunspots. We're just about over the hump on solar max. So over the next couple of years, there's going to be a lot going on. And what we really like to capture are a lot of activities on the terminus of the sun, which are prominences, especially loops, or flares. This is the GEOS X-ray flux graph, which updates every minute. And if something is happening, there will be a blip. If that blip goes up as high as M and the flare is pointing towards the Earth, then we have northern lights. And those are interesting. But for us, we look at GEOS to see whether there is something going on and then try to associate it with a sunspot on the surface that we can image and capture a flare. Flares are interesting. eruptions of any sort on the sun are interesting. And those are things that we'd like to get. Even without flares and big eruptions, things are always moving on the sun, as you will see. Oh, and there's our observatory. Actually, it's not our observatory. That's Jason's observatory. Sorry, Jason. We're just guests in Jason's observatory. And here's another place to look called space weather. Let me make sure this is updated. This shows us what's going on in the sun and the sunspots. So we can look at this and I can expand it. And I can see which spots might be interesting that when we look around the sun, as I showed you earlier, we can say, okay, we want to look at active region 4076. And what I'd like to know is what's the possibility of a flare? So if I click on this, it'll go down and looks like there's 0 possibility of the flare, this little C number down here. So I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to go there. Not much. Oh, here we go. Good possibility of a flare, but not much structure, so I'm not going to go there. 10% possibility. See the little C number? C flare, M flare, X flare. X flare is the big guy. Here's this one looked like interesting. 4070, 55% of a flare. Now, when they say 55%, that's probably over the next day. That doesn't mean for the 1 or 2 or 3 hours that we are imaging, we're going to see one. It's just possibility. Doesn't look. Now, there's one other thing that we're looking at that's worthwhile. Nope, I don't want to go there. We like to capture prominences that are associated with sunspots. And you're going to see one of those when I do my quick processing. And those are things that are right on the edge. I don't know why this is doing this. Let's go back. So see this sunspot over here, 4065 on the bottom, right down here. Since it's so near the terminus, if there's a prominences, it will probably be a loop going from sunspot to sunspot. So we will get the sunspot and the loop around with it. And that would be very interesting. I think those are all our resources. So if are there any questions?
Eric, yeah.
Yes.
Earlier you had a slide where you were explaining how the sun can move a little bit in your field of view, and so you highlighted a brown spot, sunspot with your targets, and then you said you've got buttons that you push. You're actually guiding, except you're not using a star. You're using the brown part of the sunspot. Is that correct?
Yes, and actually, this is very much. Hopefully, we're going to get a model which is so good that we don't have to do that. But I'm not sure we'll ever get there with a 5-meter telescope.
Yeah. Okay. The second thing John wants to know, is there a tool for auto-focusing in solar imaging?
Focusing, don't get me started. Here's what we do.
Okay.
We get what's known as a critical focus zone, which depends on seeing. But under the best conditions, the critical focus zone is about 687 steps in the focuser, which I didn't show you there. So that means we move the focuser around and visually try to assess whether we're in and out of focus. The problem is seeing is always changing on the sun, always changing. So therefore, seeing might get better for a moment. You think you're in a good place. And then it might get worse and you think you're in the bad place. And you're not really. So what you do is you go in and out of focus and try to do a visual V curve just the way you do it automatically on a DSO. And after many years of experience, you kind of get a feel for what is good focus. And once you get good focus to start with, you generally leave it there and it doesn't change much unless the focuser slips, which I don't think these focusers do.
You mean in any given session?
In any given session, we very seldom change focus, even though we're tempted. And I can also tell people that the best seeing for solar imaging is in the morning. And I have heard people say by 10 o'clock, it's all over. I don't quite believe that's true, but it is a thought to keep in mind that that seeing deteriorates as the day warms up. In the beginning, I thought that, well, it's, the higher the sun is, the better seeing is going to be. Just the opposite. The sun is heating things up. We get thermals coming up from the ground and seeing deteriorates. But in the afternoon, actually seeing can improve a little bit. We're still working that out. And actually at the SRO, we have enough good mornings that we can do that. So those are things yet to be determined.
Okay.
So where are we now?
We've got a couple more questions yet.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Okay. Alex wants to know, that's me. The space weather pictures that you showed us, are they live? I don't see how they could be live. And yet, are they taken, 4 times a day or what? But what's the story on them?
GEOS is live. Every minute that GEOS graph updates. So if there's an uptick in the X-ray, which is associated with a flare all the time, and it's heading up, you know that there's a flare in the sun. And if you're watching it, you can go around the sun and try to find that flare.
And that
flares are interesting.
And that is what they're showing on that website.
On GEOS, yes. Now,
GEOS.
Weather.
Yeah.
On space weather, that's updated, I think, once a day. I think it's once a day.
So they take a picture at 00 hours, whatever it is.
Whatever that is.
And that's the picture of the day. And then tomorrow they'll do another one. And they're using space cams to do that?
I really don't know what they're doing.
Okay.
There's all sorts of other space visualizations, but those are the ones that we use to find out where we want to go. When we go up in the morning, we look and we say, okay, where's the activity? Where's the X-ray flux? And which spot is likely to erupt? Or conversely, we'll go around the sun, which we'll do every morning, and see where there's a big flare. Now, I'm more of a spot person, and Detlef, who also operates a telescope, is more of a prominence person.
Are you
and, go ahead.
Are you and Detlef communicating while you're observing there, or do you do it separately?
We do it. We generally do it together, because when we capture video, if we're doing a capture every minute and it's going on for 2 hours, then we have to watch that spot to see whether it's moving, or the flare to see whether it's moving. We generally cooperate, but we're both operators, and I think Jason may become an operator, and his brother Jimmy is also interested in becoming an operator. So we could have 200 mornings a year to do it, and that's a lot of work for any one or even 2 individuals. We generate a lot of data.
Okay. One question from James, old guy do writer Povodakis, I think. How long? Jimmy. Is that Jimmy? Is that
That's
your Jimmy?
Hi, Jimmy.
Okay. How long is a typical animation run?
Right now, our average is probably 1.5 to 2 hours.
Okay, that means you're going to focus on one target for an hour or 2 hours. How long is the video you take at each attempt to capture?
So generally, we have a frame rate between 150 and 200 frames a second. We generally do 2,000 frames per video capture.
Yeah.
So that means we have about 10 seconds, more or less, video capture, and we do one every minute. So basically, in an hour, we have like 50 some frames. In 2 hours, we have 100. So in animation, but there's more to it than that. So generally, we'll have between, say, 50 and 100 frames in an animation.
And each frame took a minute to capture.
No, each frame took 10 seconds to capture. 200 frames. Let's say 200 frames a second, 2,000 frames to a video capture. That's just the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And that's all the questions there are in here right now, I think. So.
Okay, so I'm going to bring up, let's see. I'm going to bring up the program AutoStacker. I was going to jump over this. Okay, this is AutoStacker. This is a great resource, and it's free. And Emil, the guy who developed this, we'd like to get him on the Astro Imaging channel. So after we get our 60 captures, or 50 captures, or 100 captures, we end up with a bunch of videos. And I have one over here. And these are captured as SEO files. So this is a capture. I'm just going to run through it here. Oh, come on. So this is a capture. This one pretty good.
Can you maximize that?
I'm sorry?
Can you maximize the auto stacker? There we go. That's bigger.
I think that's about it. So what does AutoStacker does? AutoStacker evaluates the video you captures, tries to pick out the best frames, and then stacks those in a similar way that you do it with PixInsight. So the first thing you do is you analyze your video. Now this is called the quality curve. And if the quality curve is above this one, that's a good quality curve. That means there are lots of frames in here which are worth stacking. So next thing you do is you place a grid over this. And there's a grid. And then you decide how many you want to stack. I don't know, it might be a little hard to see. Let's say we're only going to stack 50 frames. And then you say stack. Now, if you have 50 or 100 captures to do it, you set this on automatic. You drag them all in there. You give it the conditions that you want to stack. And then you go and have lunch and you come back and everything is stacked for you. So we do this after we capture the frames, but before we go into an animation. And you see over here on this folder, here's our 50 stack. And there's our stack. That's the best 50 frames of that particular capture. Now, this is not enhanced, and we're not going to do enhancing right now. Okay, that's just an example. So let's go through an example. Let me get back to where I am. I have 2 examples to do. Hopefully, we can do it in plenty of time. Okay, so here, in this case, we did a spot, and I think we had about 60 frames. And what we do is we go into Photoshop, and we go into File. It may be hard to see, but I'll describe it. Underneath Scripts, Load Frames in Stack. And then you browse, and Processing Examples, 2 spots. And there's our 100 out of 2,000. And we're only going to do now, I think this was 60 frames. Now, you may want to enlarge this. So we got 60 captures, and we moved it around a little bit. So if we were just to put those in and try to do an animation, it would jiggle a little bit. And what we want to do is we want everything to be aligned perfectly. Now, in the old days, a few years back, we used to do this all manually. It would go in layer by layer by layer and align it visually. We don't do that anymore because there's a little button down here that says attempt to automatically align. I don't know if you want to enlarge that. If you do that and you have decent data, Photoshop will auto align everything in those stacks. And all you have to do is let it happen. Now, I'm not going to do that because that'll take 2 or 3 minutes and we just have to watch it and play music, and we're not going to do that. So I'm going to cancel this and just show you an example of a few. So go down to scripts, load files into stack. We're going to browse. In this case, let's just do 5, 2, 3, 4, 5. Attempt to auto align. I don't know if you can see on the right, it's putting in the layers, and when it gets done with that, and now they're all aligned. I'm just going to hide this. So I'm going to open up the real file in a minute, but let me just play this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stack alignment. At the bottom of the screen, I have a timeline which is shown, and I'm going to say, it's hard to see, it says create frame animation. And then over here, I'm going to say make frames from layers. And you can see by the alignment, not everything is perfect, okay? But if I play it, everything is going to be aligned. Now, at this point, when I did it the first time, I said, boy, that's cool. But I won't say that now. So let's open up the real file. We're going to close this. Now let's open up the real align file, and you won't have to wait for it. Spots. So now we see all of our captures for those 2 spots, and they're all stacked up. And I'm going to produce a timeline and animation by clicking on Make Frames from Layers. And now if I hit the Go button on the bottom, the little caret, it's going to play it. And that's the first step in the animation. And the spots are perfectly aligned. But you can see that we had a little movement here. We didn't do a perfect job of guiding on this. So I'm going to stop this. So what do we do next? The next thing we do is we crop out those areas which, are white or transparent, and we're only interested in the align ones. So I'm going to go in. Hit the crop tool in Photoshop and just crop this out. And now let's play our animation. See whether we did a good job. Oh, you see there's a little blip over there. Should have cropped it a little bit more. So that's our initial animation. I'm going to crop this a little bit more. So now we have a cropped image, which has no transparent areas. And now we have a bunch of aligned frames. But it's not very interesting. In other words, it's not very contrasting. We haven't brought out the best of it. So what do we do next? We export all of the frames to individual files, all the aligned frames. And we do that by hitting File, Export, Export, Layers to Files. And if I hit this button and tell it where to go, it'll export all of those individual layered files, all perfectly aligned and all ready to enhance in PixInsight. So I'm not going to do it because that takes a couple of minutes, but I can tell you that I've done this before, and I now have a folder with all of the align files just like this. And I don't need to save it because I've already saved it. Save it. Okay, this is a little break point. Are there any questions up to now?
Brandon had one.
Sure.
He started off with a compliment. Good, great presentation, Eric. And then he asked, do you always take the best 50 frames, or do you determine a percentage based on the quality graph in AutoStacker?
That's a great question. The answer is we're still figuring that out. And here's my commentary on this. We generally take 2,000 frames. I generally stack up 20, 50, 100, and 150. And then I go and look at each of these to see which one is going to give me the best result. Now, I can tell you, the better the scene, the fewer frames you have to stack up. And the more frames that you stack up, I don't want to say the blurrier the image, but naturally the image is not quite as sharp, and you have to process it more in PixInsight. So the answer is there's no good answer to that. But if you have great seeing, then I would stack fewer frames. The other thing is, seeing is never consistent. It might be great for 5 or 10 minutes, and you have a little area where it's unsettled. If you're going to do an animation, you're going to do a capture every minute, right? And you don't want to skip over those minutes. So there are some frames that won't be as perfect as other frames. And there's nothing you can do about that. The good thing about an animation, it's just like a film. If you watch a film and there's action in the film, it looks like everything is in focus. But if you stop it at any one frame, it could be blurry. Your mind fills in the rest of the detail. And that's the same way with these animations. So not every frame has to be perfect. Now, if there are frames which are obviously bad, a cloud goes over, we can throw those out. But generally, we take all frames so that we have a continuous, smooth animation. Now, there's one other trick which I'm not going to show you quite now. So what do we do next? We go to PixInsight. Why do we go to PixInsight? Well, let me show you. So let's open up. Oh, let's see, PixInsight there. No. Let me just navigate to where we have to be. Processing examples. Spots. So there's our 100 export right there. So what I want to do now is figure out what the best way is to highlight these, to give them more contrast. So I'm just going to open up a few of these. Let's say, no, what's wrong key? And I opened up the wrong one. Okay, Eric, let's go back. That's the next example. 2 spots. Let's just open up 2. Okay, so I want to figure out how best to bring out some contrast and detail on this. And there are a number of tools in PixInsight, and the ones that I use are either the Solar Toolbox, if you haven't used it yet. This is the Solar Toolbox, this guy right here, and Blur Exterminator down here. So I'm going to, there's a number of sliders here. And you can enhance the contrast, the prominence. This is surface and prominence. I'm going to select surface only. I am not going to color this. That's another discussion, which I will have. But I'm going to see what happens here. Oh, that looks better. Brings out contrast, didn't blow out. And I'm going to give it a little more detail with Blur Exterminator. And that looks all right. I don't think we over-processed this. So that's going to be the process which I'm going to repeat on our 60 frames that I exported. And how am I going to do that? I'm going to use the process container and the image container. And if you haven't used those in PixInsight, it's a way of doing the same thing over and over again on multiple files without manually having to do it. So I'm going to put the process container conditions over here, and I'm going to put the blur exterminator conditions over here. And now in the image container, I'm going to put in all the files that I want to operate on. So I'll click on this little button here. There's the 2 spots. Now, if I drag this little caret and dump it onto the process container, it'll start doing all of these at once. Now, I'm not going to do that because that takes maybe 5 minutes. We don't have 5 minutes to watch this happen. So I'm going to close these, and I'm going to ask you to suspend disbelief and pretend it's already done, which it is. And I'm going to go back to Photoshop because it is already done. And I will open up all the files that I process in PixInsight with Solar Toolbox and Blur Exterminator, and I'm going to bring them in. They're all going to be perfectly aligned, and I'm going to be able to produce a nice contrasty animation. Now, I've already done this, so I'm not going to do it now because it takes a few minutes. So let me open up that file. Use spots. And there it is. Crop 1, I did the Solar Toolbox and the Blur Exterminator. And this is the resulting file. By the way, I'm calling this one the hamster because to me it kind of looks like a hamster.
Eric,
Yes,
where is Solar Toolbox in PixInsight?
it's a process just under Solar Toolbox.
Okay,
So,
I just opened up and looked and I didn't find it. Do you have to add it extra, or at
you
least?
may have to add it extra.
Well, meaning I'm looking at.
You may be right. You may have to add it extra.
Okay, and I would download it from the PixInsight.
You'd have to go in and put in the link to the Solar Toolbox and then have PixInsight update. That's how you add processes.
Okay.
I mean, it's again, I could go over those things, but I don't think we
Okay.
have the time.
Okay.
So now I'm going to create a frame animation by clicking on that button, and I'm going to make frames from layers, and that's my animation. The hamster. There's a lot going on here. There's a little bit of flare in the center. You can see things jumping around. And how many frames did we have? We had 53. And it will play over and over again. Now, generally what I do is I like to have a pause at the beginning and a pause at the end. This is just my personal preference. You don't have to do that. And now you can see where it starts. Wait for 2 seconds, go to the end, and it'll pop back to the beginning. And you can see the changes that have occurred in the time period. The other thing I normally do is I'll put down the conditions. How long, when was it taken, what spots were these, how many frames there were. And if I now bring up and I think, where is the hamster? There's the hamster. And there's my posted result of the hamster. Now, I think I did some other enhancements, but not to worry. And again, all this can be done within an hour from when I capture. and when I've stacked all the images. And nothing has to be done manually. It's all done automatically. Okay. Any more questions? I have one more processing example. No. I think I explained it.
Yeah.
Focus is, I wish there were one. You basically go in there, you zoom in on the object, you adjust the focuser, you know what your critical focus zone, so you know how big the steps have to be in your focuser, and you go in and out until you find that position visually. And I don't know how many hundreds of hours we've spent on this, but I think Detlef and I, and anyone that does these close-up images has to struggle with that. If you're doing a full disk, that's easy. But if you're doing a field of view that's 1/100th of a full disk, focus is a big deal and difficult to do. You just have, it's experience. I wish there were an autofocus. Actually, fire capture has something that's supposed to help. I haven't found it helpful. But maybe that's something
Okay.
we can.
Eric, Steve said that you have to add the solar toolbox as a repository in answer to that question earlier.
There you go. Thank you.
And Brandon asks, what settings in BlurX are you using for solar?
I experiment with it.
Okay.
So
Okay.
basically, you're not doing anything with stars. So I generally do Solar Toolbox first and Blur Exterminator second. And I just adjust that one slider that says, how much sharpening should there be. And again, the better the data, the less you have to do in both Solar Toolbox.
Okay. Have you used HDR process?
No,
Okay.
not for this.
All right. And Brandon again asks, any use of IMPPG?
Don't know what that is.
Brandon, could you give us some clarification, and we'll ask again at our next question break. Okay.
I'm going to open up another file.
Okay.
Why don't I do this in color? There's color. There's black and white. As they say, in my humble opinion, you can see more detail in a grayscale image than you can in a color image. My rationale is visually, I think that's the case. And you have more sensors in your eyes that see light and dark than you do see color. You have more rods by tenfold than you do cones. If you like color, there's just one setting in Solar Toolbox, and you can do everything that I showed you except hit the color button and it'll produce a color animation. This is a matter of preference. Sometimes I do these in color, especially on proms, but usually I do it in grayscale. Let's close these. Let's do another one. Okay, we don't have to go through the process anymore. Let's do the most exciting capture we have done for the past month. And that is where we got sunspots and we got loops, proms that were loops. And rather than go in, I'm going to say spots, speculae, and loops. So in this case, I think we got almost 2 hours of data. And the interesting part of this is we were able to get surface detail and we were able to get the loops. Now, from what I understand from loops, they generally start and terminate at a sunspot. So if you get a sunspot next to the terminus of the sun, you're likely to see these prominences which loop on you, and they are interesting. I'm going to play this. Now, again, I just brought in all of these. I had it auto align, and I haven't cropped it yet. So I'm just going to play this. And you can see the loops, but you can see that they're not very prominent yet. And you can probably see that maybe our polar alignment wasn't as good as it could be. We're going to fix that because the surface varies. The other thing, I'm going to zoom in on this because there's another aspect of this which is worthwhile. These little eruptions on the surface are speculi. And we're going to sharpen those up. But you see there's a lot happening in these speculi. There's a lot of eruptions right on the surface. When you're looking at a flat surface, it just looks like ripples. But when you're looking at the terminus of the sun, these speculi just jump out from the edge of the sun to that layer right above it, whose name escapes me. Please, someone fill that in for me. You can see all these speculi. So what do I do next? Let's stop this animation. So as before, the next step would be to crop this. Play it again, make sure I did a good crop. There are no transparent areas. I don't see any. Let's see how many. I think we had 91. Oh, I had a little one on the bottom. See that? Yep, I didn't crop it perfectly. So I'm just going to crop this again. No, don't do that. Okay, we're going to crop out that little spot. Now when we play it, we should have no white spots. Everything. That looks good. You can also see this little flare, which is in the lower right, which just comes out of nowhere. Just straight up. There it is. Oh, and when we saw this, we knew this was going to be exciting. We knew that we could bring out these loops and enhance the surface. And by the way, there were some nice little ejections happening in the middle of this spot. So I'm going to stop this. So now I'll export all the layers and I'll go into PixInsight. Let me just do this one more time. Open up a couple of those files. There's my export. I'll just open up two of them. And now when I do Solar Toolbox, I will select surface and prominences because I want to enhance both. And you can play with all these sliders, but let's see what it does the way I have it set. Oh, that looks good. A lot more detail. And let's bring out a little more detail with Blur Exterminator. That looks a little over processed, so I'm going to back off here. Reduce this slightly. Now, normally I would spend 5 minutes to come up with the conditions for the Solar Toolbox and Blur Exterminator. I think that's about right. So now I'll go through using image container and process container, put in those two conditions for Solar Toolbox and Blur Exterminator, and do all these 91 files, bring them back into Photoshop. Now we got Photoshop. I don't need this. And open up the result. And now this animation has everything. If you look closely, those loops are coming in and out of those two spots. There are two spots, one right kind of on the edge and one right here, that are the source and the terminus of those loops. It's kind of hard to see, but that's where they're coming from and that's where they're going to. And by the way, this is being played in the right order too, I believe. Let's see. I think it's played in the right order, but we can reverse it. And again, I put a 2 second in the beginning, 2 second at the end. I'll put a label on it. I'll describe when it was done. And in the end, we will post it. And let me show you those two postings. Now, I did it in black and white or grayscale. And Detlef did it in color. Now, if you look closely, there's a lot going on. You can just see those little speculi, this erupting from the surface. So imagine what those look like when they're on a flat surface, how the little ripples you see around the sunspot are really those speculi erupting straight towards you, or more or less towards you. So that's my grayscale image version. And this is Detlef's color version. All done with the same kind of processing. Let's go back to, let's shut those down. Any questions at this point, Alex?
Yeah, oops. As you know, we turn off the microphones and stuff like that. So, yeah, we got a couple coming in. First off, IMPPG, which we were talking about earlier, is a free solar deconvolution process that Brandon tells us is effective for both regular images and inverted. And it has histogram and deconvolution processes that work quite well in real time compared to BlurX. So he's just suggesting we might want to look at that for doing that, some of that work.
Well, let me just comment on that. These are tools, not rules. If tomorrow there's a better tool, I switch. I have no loyalty to any of these things. Whatever works best is what we will use. But the whole idea was to do this in an automated way, so you don't have to do it one at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I'm really showing, the automated way. Is there better things in Solar Toolbox? Will Solar Toolbox be improved?
Okay.
Probably, maybe.
And it just reminds me that's what Luke is going to be talking about on May 18th, I think, is how you can automate some of your processing by using these kinds of tools. Brandon has asked about the camera sensor you're using. He's discussed 9 micron versus various things for 432 camera. But what do you use? What does your camera look like?
I'm using a Player One 174. I've used a QHY 174. It has about 1920 pixels by, what was it, 1200.
Mm-hmm.
So you always have to make sure that you're not, you don't have too many pixels and too small a sensor for the resolution that you're going to have on any day. I think we're still experimenting with that. I have a 178 camera, which is a smaller sensor and smaller pixels. We're going to experiment with that. And we have some other experiments coming up too.
Okay.
So any other questions?
No, that's pretty much it. There's a discussion about camera choices and stuff like that. But
I think the 174 is a good all-around camera. It's reasonably fast. We can get, if you crop it down, we can get over 200 frames per second. Some of the other cameras which have even bigger pixels or sensors, you may have only 20 or 30 frames per second, which is really not fast enough. You should be around 100 frames per second if you can get it, in order to slow down, the general rippling that you see on these solar images. Okay, next.
Okay, that's it.
Almost done. Oh, running a little bit over. Let's see. I'm just going to play a few of these. This is what we've done to date. I'll just, oh, I love those. I think we love the loops and the flares. And sometimes we blacken out the surface. Here's one we did earlier. You can see the rotation in the prominences and the activity on the surface.
Do you try to get just one target a day?
Yes.
Okay, so you spend 2 hours in the morning recording the target. How long do you spend later processing it?
Well, I will start the stacking and the processing with auto stacker, but I'll just start that and then, go do something else.
Okay, so these, each different video that we're seeing here took how much time altogether?
Actual work time or from,
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, if there are times where you set the computer off running by itself, don't count that. Just how much of Eric time does it cost?
well, I would say a couple hours to capture the data.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, less than an hour to produce the final result.
Okay.
I inverted this one just because it seemed interesting. And those are
Eric?
proms.
Eric,
Yes.
I just have a couple of comments. Have you tried the NASA Solar Dynamics Observatory? That might be useful for like predicting the flares.
Yes, I've been to SDO before.
Yeah, and another comment regarding PixInsight. I found that I also have the Solar Toolbox, but that's available as a separate repository. And the repository is actually on cosmicphotons.com.
Interesting.
Cosmicphotons.com, you have a folder which is PI-modules and then Solar Toolbox. You need to add the repository from there and you will get it. But another thing that I recall is that you need to have PixInsight at least with the March 2024 version or similar. Otherwise, that wouldn't be available.
Good information. So I let this one play a little bit. If you ever go to a spot and it's white, it's like blown out, that's a flare. So we got in here. You see that little blip on the bottom, that little hump? We got in just as I went into the geos and I said, oh, look, that's going up. And I quickly found the spot and I got there just before it reaches peak. And that's a peak. That white, that's a flare. And you can see the flare dies down. Now, it's hard to capture these flares. And that's why they call it lucky imaging, because you got to be lucky. And maybe one more. That was right on the terminus. I didn't see any loops on this one, but maybe my processing, maybe we hadn't set the conditions quite right. All right, I'm going to. All right, can I stop sharing? All right, I'm back. Any questions in the meantime? Sorry, I ran a little bit long, but it's, there were some things to cover and I just definitely had to do it.
There have been a few more comments and lots of compliments along the way, Eric. Those are really stunning videos. So it was fun to watch. Fun to watch. Anyway, if there are any more questions, get them in as quick as you can. We'll have another episode of Solar Imaging next week with Luca And I think you'll get a lot out of that. And remember, we are still looking for presenters. We've got a few open dates. Check the calendar anytime you want, but we need people to contribute their, not only just their expertise, but even their just experience. When it didn't work out so well, sometimes you've got a lot to offer people. Now, I don't see any of the new questions coming in. Are we ready to wrap up? And Terry, you're in charge. So go ahead and check us out. Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Jaime.